The blood supply of the splanchnic circulation, it includes the arteries that branch off of the aorta and go to the digestive organs. So included in that are the hepatic, the splenic, and also the left gastric arteries, as well as the inferior and superior mesentery arteries. Now, within that is the hepatic portal circulation, which is very important. It's a specialized circulation that drains nutrient-rich blood from the digestive organs, brings them to the liver, delivers the blood to the liver for the processing. So the neural reflex pathway, it is initiated by stimuli both in and out of the gastrointestinal system. So just by the mere thought of food, we can activate our digestive system. So what's really interesting is that the GI tract has its own nervous system, and we refer to that as the enteric nervous system. So enteric referring to GI tract or gut. So we also call this the gut brain, and it contains a whole bunch of neurons, in fact more than the spinal cord. So the gut brain is made up of these enteric neurons, and it's the major nerve supply for the GI tract. And within this, there's a couple different nerve plexuses. There is the submucosal nerve plexus, and that's also called the Meissner's nerve plexus. You may see the term Meissner's in some other textbooks. And then there's another nerve plexus, which is in the muscles, called the myenteric nerve plexus. So if we look a little bit closer, we can see that external stimuli can trigger our gut brain via the CNS, the central nervous system, or there can be local reflexes. So basically, depending on what's in the lumen of the GI tract, so it can activate different receptors, and those we refer to as short reflexes occur entirely within the GI wall. So there's a couple different ways that the digestive activity can be stimulated. The three concepts that regulate GI activity are a range of mechanical and chemical stimuli that are located in the GI tract. So for example, if the GI tract stretches, if there's a change in osmolarity or pH, those can activate mechanical or chemical receptors. There's also effectors of the digestive activity, which are the smooth muscle and the glands. And so when they're stimulated, they stimulate the smooth muscle to mix and move the contents within the GI tract. And the last would be the neurons, both inside the gut, intrinsic, and outside the gut, extrinsic. And there are short reflexes and long reflexes that control that. So let's look at the mouth and the associated organs. The mouth is where the food is chewed, obviously, and it's mixed with enzyme-rich saliva that begins this digestive process. And specifically, there's an enzyme called salivary amylase that breaks down carbohydrates. So digestion begins there, and the mouth, it's lined with stratified squamous epithelium, many, many layers. So if there's injury to a superficial layer of the epithelium, deeper layers can replace them. Then the tongue, its function is to grip, reposition, and mix the food for chewing. Then salivary glands, and then finally the teeth. So let's look at the salivary glands a little more closely. There is basically three different pairs. There is one in the cheek called the parotid gland. There's one that's in the mandible called the submandibular gland. And then finally, one that's directly underneath the tongue called the sublingual gland. And on the right side of this slide, we can see the histology of the salivary glands. And specifically in the submandibular gland, there are darkly and lightly staining acini. So the salivary glands, they function by producing saliva. And the saliva has many, many different functions. Cleanses the mouth, dissolves the food for taste, and most importantly, begins the breakdown of starch with the enzyme amylase, so carbohydrates. So carbohydrate digestion begins in the mouth. Most saliva is produced from these major salivary glands. And again, those three are called the parotid, submandibular, and the sublingual, all of which are going to open into the oral cavity. And that's triggered by the presence of something put in the mouth, or it could be triggered by just the thought of eating something. So if you're thinking about something that you want to eat, your mouth starts to water for that very reason. So the different cells that are in the salivary glands, as we saw on the couple slides ago, are the mucus cells and the serous cells. And the composition of saliva, it's mostly water, so it's hypoosmotic. It's slightly acidic, has electrolytes that we would expect, has these enzymes, salivary amylase and lingual lipase. So again, the salivary amylase is to break down carbohydrates, and the lingual lipase is to break down fats. There's also a few important proteins, specifically IgA, an antibody, metabolic waste, and other chemicals listed here. So what's amazing to think of is that in one day we produce 1.5 liters of saliva. 1,500 milliliters per day can be produced. And so remember, the main control of this is the parasympathetic nervous system, controls digestion. So you can see here that strong sympathetic stimulation inhibits salivation and results in a dry mouth. So our teeth, it's important that you know the main types of teeth. The teeth lie in the sockets in the gum, both in the mandible and the maxilla bones. The process of chewing is called mastication. And there is baby teeth. There's 20 deciduous teeth that erupt from between the ages of 6 and 24 months. And then finally, the permanent teeth are present, and there's 32 of those. So those groups of teeth are classified by shape. There's incisors, canines, premolars, and molars. And there's a formula to know how many of each there are. You should know the main function of each of them. And again, if you think of the shape of them, it makes sense. So your incisors are chisel shaped for cutting. Canines are also called the eye teeth because they're directly beneath our eyes. Makes sense. So they're fang-like teeth that tear or pierce. Think of vampires. They have really sharp canines. Premolars are going to serve to grind or crush the food. And then finally, molars. So the dental formula for adults, this is going to be the top row and the bottom row on one side. So the medial teeth are the incisors. Then there's one canine, 2 premolars, and then 3 molars.